Fate Graphite, a young man who has never tasted real power, is one of the Forsaken due to his utterly useless ability, Gluttony. Yeah, you heard right. He is ever starving, never satisfied, and his stomach growls much like my neighbor's dog. He discovers he isn't as useless as he thinks when he finally kills a thief and steals his ability. In a whole world where your ability means everything, Gluttony should be the dumbest power to be born with. What the hell were the gods thinking? The anime starts off with a masked man fighting several goblins, destroying them with ease, but he is unsatisfied and wants more. A merchant on his way back from a trip is attacked by goblins as well. He cries for help and is saved by a group of warriors who easily defeat several of them and take the spoils back to the town. That's when we meet our protagonist, Fate, who overhears them talk about their success and tells himself that it can never be him, since the only thing he is good at is consuming food without being satisfied. He begins to put the blame on the only skill he has, Gluttony. I can't even begin to tell you guys how ridiculously useless this skill is. He reminds himself to be thankful. Unlike some others, he has a job. Later that day, a group of holy knights pass through the town, and everyone has their eyes fixated on them. They are a trio, the Vlerick siblings. Holy knights make their way to the castle to meet Fate, who is covering for them. Sir Raphael, one of them, tosses his pay on the ground and asks him to pick it up. Fate humbly obliges, and Hado intentionally steps on his hands as he bends to pick it up. Sir Hado feigns an apology, saying that Fate was so filthy he didn't notice him. Like an annoying pet, Fate's stomach begins to growl at the most awkward moment, and Raphael points out how disgusting it is. Hado gets pissed off and kicks Fate in the gut. That was a kick back to the realization of how, in this world, there are haves and there are have-nots. They beat him even more and rain insults on him, condemning his useless skill. What separates people in this world are the special skills bestowed on them by the gods. And boy, I must say, the gods were angry when they gave Fate a skill. They go on with the insults and beating until another holy knight named Roxy Hart comes to his aid and tells them to stop. She tells them that such behavior is not befitting of a holy knight. The trio siblings eventually leave Fate alone, and Roxy proceeds to clean up his wounds. It's Roxy's shift now, so she relieves Fate of his duties and watches the gate. Fate finally gets to eat. The bartender walks up to him and asks if he got beaten again. He tells Fate that if he keeps letting the knights treat him that way, he'll meet the same fate as the last guy who got hired by the knights. Believe me, it's not a good-looking end. He leaves and heads home, and his stomach begins to growl again. I think we can all come to the conclusion that this stomach has a mind of its own. He curses how it growls because he just ate a full meal. Fate begins to wish he had a better skill, at least one which would allow him to fend for himself. But sadly, in this world, there's no changing the skills you were born with. That's when he notices some thieves jumping the fence into the castle, and he quickly goes to report this to Roxy. She tells him to watch the gate while she goes to capture the thieves. He agrees, and after a while, he sees one of the thieves injured and running towards him. He becomes very scared and almost runs away, but ends up manning up and stabs the dude with the spear in his hands. Immediately, his gluttony skill becomes activated and his stats increase. Fate becomes extremely confused as the powers telepathy and identify appear under his skills. Roxy emerges from the shadows and shows deep concern for Fate because she knows he is very weak, but Fate notices something strange. He realizes he can read her mind, and he is even more confused now. Roxy thanks Fate for stopping the thief and shows her gratitude by offering him a job to work for her family. He tries to decline, but she isn't having it. He eventually considers it and accepts. Fate gets home and keeps pondering the events of the day in his room that looks worse than a prison cell. He realizes all his stats are now in triple digits. Dude went from 0 to hero in less than 24 hours. His new skills confuse him so much because he doesn't understand how they came about. He gathers up confidence as he discovers he might now be able to fend for himself. The next day, Fate goes to buy himself a sword. Bro literally has no chills. He approaches the merchant who chases him away for being poor and tells him to pick a sword from the discarded ones. Fate starts to go through this pile of rubbish swords, and that's when he first uses his power of Identify to figure out which sword is good for him. Suddenly, he sees a sword that speaks to him. Not figuratively, the sword literally talked to him. This sword named Greed tells Fate to buy him. Fate still can't get over the fact that this sword just spoke, and he ends up buying the sword. He pays for it and leaves the merchant's shop. Fate decides to take the sword for a test run or test fight or whatever you might call it. The sword learns Fate's full name and calls it over and over again. Suddenly he is attacked by a goblin. Immediately he kills the goblin. He activated another skill. The more he kills, the more he activates. He turns over 100 zombies to mincemeat and discovers that some of his skills have even entered 4 digits. He realizes that for the first time in forever, his stomach isn't growling. What a relief. Greed explains to Fate that his power of gluttony is one that steals other people's skills. A group of warriors head towards where Fate was, and Greed tells him not to let anyone know about his power, as it is one that defies the divine law. Fate is about to leave the battlefield, but Greed tells him that he should take the goblin ears at least as his spoils from this battle, and suddenly Fate stumbles into someone dragging a little girl. Immediately, he unknowingly reads the girl's mind and hears her plea for help. He tries to identify the skill of this person, but discovers the person is using a conceal ability, which masks the true values of his skill. Greed asks Fate what he's going to do about it, and Fate tells him he can't just sit and watch the girl be taken by the man. He follows them to the place they were going to. Elsewhere, while praying, A nun tells some orphans the story of how skills came into this world. When the creator of the world, Holy Lapis, departed the world, she left humans with the skills necessary for them to protect themselves, thus creating the hierarchy and imbalance we now have in this world. The kids in this orphanage all have very low skills, so this isn't a pleasant story for them. That's when we realize that the girl Fate followed, Sahara, is actually one of the kids in this orphanage, and they were searching for her. Fate waits for an opportunity to try to free Sahara, and luckily he finds one. The kidnapper steps away, giving Fate the chance. He approaches the girl and tells her she's going to be okay now. Guess our boy has now become confident, since he figured he could swing a sword. He releases the girl and they plan to flee when suddenly the kidnapper shows up behind them. Fate knows it's going to be difficult to protect the girl and fight the kidnapper at the same time, so he ponders on what to do. Greed gives Fate an idea, telling him to back away first since the kidnapper clearly underestimates him. Fate runs with the girl and hides behind some boxes. Then he pushes the boxes down to cause a distraction and proceeds to strike the kidnapper who dodged. The dude gets furious and tries to hit Fate with his special move, but ultimately, Fate defeats him. Fate wants to know the name of the holy knight who instructed him to kidnap the girl and asks the guy some questions, just a little touch here and there, and this fellow spills the beans by telling Fate it's Sir Hado. The girl is saved, and Fate takes her to eat. Afterward, he returns her to the orphanage. Turns out he's feeling really good about what he just did, and I mean, why shouldn't he? Fate checks his stats and sees he has unlocked a technical skill. Greed explains what it is to him, and also tells Fate that he simply won that fight with the kidnapper out of luck. Fate is determined to get stronger, so he will win fights by his own power and not out of luck. Greed reminds him that he'll be starting to work for the Hart family the next day, and ruins the moment by asking him if he's going to show up there looking like a beggar from Harry Potter. Our boy really needed new clothes. Meanwhile, news travels around that Roxy's father had passed, and Roxy will be taking over as the new head of the family. There's a little bit of tension as the men wonder if Roxy is going to be able to handle the behavior of all the knights, especially the Vlerick siblings. It's a new day, and our boy is dressed to impress. Fate made his way to the Holy Knight District and is astonished by the size of the place. Roxy comes to meet him, and they share a little mushy moment. She leads him in and takes him first to her father's grave. She tells Fate that her dad was killed by a divine dragon, and Fate becomes a little sad because she was worried about him, even when she was going through such heartache. She welcomes Fate once more, and stretches out her hand for a handshake, and Fate goes to shake her hand but abruptly stops when he realizes if he comes in contact with her, he'll be able to read her thoughts. Roxy then introduces Fate to the chief maid of the Hart estate, Haru. Haru instructs Fate to carry himself in an orderly manner, befitting a worker of the Hart family. But apparently, Fate left his table manners at home when he's given meat to eat. It's already been a week since Fate started working for the Hart family, and let's be honest, the dude is a bit of a hard worker. The other servants begin to actually like him, and they ask him to take a rest. They confess that when he first arrived, they thought he was a bit strange. Hell, I still think our boy is all sorts of strange. Like clockwork, his strangeness becomes even stranger when his stomach begins to growl again. The other servants can't believe their ears because they all just ate. Haru comes to inform Fate that Roxy is calling him, and he follows her, still very disturbed because his stomach continues growling. He meets up with Roxy, and she calls him by the sweet nickname his dad used to call him, Faye. Our dude loses his cool and blushes like a 6-year-old. Still, Fate can't understand why he just kept getting hungrier and hungrier. The thought occupies his mind, until ultimately he slumps and passes out. Fate later wakes up in his room with a note from Roxy, asking him to take the day off. He asks Greed what's going on with him, and Greed tells him the problem is his gluttony skill. Once Gluttony has gotten a taste of souls, there's no stopping the hunger for more souls. Greed tells him the more he devours, the stronger he will get, and the more he will want to devour. Fate seeks to quench the hunger, so he goes to fight some goblins. He uses a hoodie to cover his face and sneaks into the forest where he killed a lot of goblins. The hunger finally quenches, and shortly afterward, he comes in contact with a goblin king. He defeats the goblin king as well, and steals his skill. That's when Greed becomes greedy once more, and asks Fate to transfer all his skills to him so he'll unlock another level of his power. Fate initially disagrees, but a greedy sword is an angry sword, so he later succumbs. After transferring all his skills, Greed takes the form of a mystical bow that shoots arrows once you pull from the bow. Now that's worth being greedy for. Fate takes the ears of the Goblin King, which he gives to the orphanage. The next day, Fate catches Roxy leaving the palace in disguise, and even I almost couldn't recognize her. She explains to him that she's going on a secret inspection, and tells Fate to keep it a secret. Fate agrees, and is about to go back to his duty, when she drags him and tells him to accompany her. They head into town and Fate calls Roxy by her name, and she tells him not to use her real name but an alias, Lexi. Fate and Roxy share another mushy moment, but Greed just had to butt in. Roxy takes a look at Greed and tells Fate the sword could use some maintenance. They head into the market and are basking in the scenery when a holy knight passes through. I already told you guys that Fate's stomach must be a ticking time bomb for disaster because it's at this moment that it decides to growl again. This infuriates the Holy Knight, who begins to ask everyone what made that ridiculous sound. Fate gets on his knees to quickly apologize, but the Holy Knight wasn't having it and was about to step on him when Lexi steps in. I can't be the one to blow her cover. She tells the Knight that Fate has already apologized, and the Knight becomes angrier, wondering who this young lady who dared to speak to him in such a manner must be. People then begin to see a resemblance and start asking if she's Lady Roxy. Fate comes to her aid, or rather, Roxy came to his aid, and they pretended to be a couple. Their brilliant display allows them to escape easily, and because Roxy locks arms with Fate, he is able to read her mind once more. Roxy goes on to take a look at some gems, and that's when Fate realizes that even though she's a knight, she's still a normal young female. They leave the place, and that's when they overhear a group of warriors talking about a roaming monster that killed a lot of goblins, and even a goblin king. Fate is perplexed because he knows the roaming monster is none other than himself. Roxy proceeds to ask them some questions, but they didn't really give her any useful information after that. She confesses that that's the secret mission she was on, and then she asks Fate to take her to a place where she might meet a lot of warriors, and Fate takes her to the bar he usually goes to eat. The bartender is surprised to see that Fate is still alive, and is even more teased that Fate came with his girlfriend. Greed makes a joke about having Fate executed for it, and the bartender serves them some drinks. Old Ad walks into the bar, and Roxy begins to ask some more questions. He tells her that the roaming monster is rumored to be a lich, and that the Holy Knights are taking direct action to deal with this threat. Fate gets a little bit scared because there is no lich. It's simply him. A group of traveling warriors walk into the bar and order some food and drinks. One of them walks up to Lexi and tells her to join them and have some fun. Fate is about to defend her, forgetting she's a badass Holy Knight. Lexi pushes the guy away without even breaking a sweat and proceeds to reveal that she's actually the Holy Knight, Sir Roxy. All the travelers get on their knees and plead for mercy, and she immediately forgives them. She even plays with them and beats them at arm wrestling. After leaving the bar, they head home and they hear some noise on the street. They see it's the Vlerick siblings again, and they are harassing a little boy. Roxy tells them to release the boy, and he tells them he's looking for his mom. They help him find his mother, and Roxy takes Fate to polish up Greed, who has been waiting endlessly for that moment. After that, they decide to go home to avoid getting in trouble with Haru. Fate later buys an ore for Roxy that has a gem inside, and she is very grateful and wants to pay him back. Meanwhile, the Vlerick siblings make plans to head to Gallia. Being the ruthless goblin slayer and monster wearing a mask, Fate has gained the name Corpse the Lich. He unleashes nighttime terrors against other warriors and goblins as he tries to fill his insatiable hunger for goblin souls. With the way the warriors ran for their lives, Blood must think he's Batman. After nighttime duties, Fate has to suffer the consequences of living a double life in the morning. While he works in the garden, he continuously complains about how short his sleep was after playing superhero all night. Just then, Roxy approaches him to give him a top-secret mission. Knowing Roxy, she always has something up her elegant sleeves. Thinking it's another one of her exhilarating inspections, the next spot Fate finds himself is in a carriage with her heading to harvest grapes. In other words, the top-secret mission of Roxy is to show Fate some fresh grapes. Man, she's so unpredictable. When they arrive at the farm residence, Roxy's mom, Aisha Hart, makes sure she gives Roxy a proper welcome, despite her sick condition. Roxy gets to introduce Fate to her mother, and you can count on Fate to bring the best of his manners along. Luckily for Fate, Aisha won't be one of those crazy mother-in-laws if he ever marries Roxy. Her smile is soft, her presence is friendly, and she seems to like Fate already. She also asks Fate if he likes Roxy. Of course, this first question turns Roxy's cheeks a bright color of red. Not sure if it's embarrassment or shock, but the answer was pretty much obvious from her reaction. Thankfully, Aisha cleared the air that she asked the question to know how Fate felt to work under Roxy's. This, in no time, settles the tension, however. Fate's response sends rockets flying. Fate declares his adoration for Roxy, and if possible, would love to serve her until his last breath. Now you can imagine the red stains on Roxy's cheeks compared to before. She simply covers it up by heading to her room so she can rest. Been in this game long enough to know when a gorgeous girl is tired of the conversation. Despite all of that, Aisha worries for her daughter's well-being since becoming a holy knight and head of the house after her father's death. It's up to Fate once again, who assures her that Roxy has been doing a terrific job handling both aspects. He crowns his response, saying Roxy has gained recognition and the trust of the people. This at least gives her some peace of mind. While Roxy reminisces about her time in the family house with her late father, Fate spends time harvesting grapes and bonding with the workers. Through minor conversations and some male gossip, Fate is informed about Roxy's motive for returning home. Turns out it's to handle monster business, Kobolds from the Northern Canon are revealed to disrupt the harvest every year, and it's Roxy's task to take care of them when they attack. This information must have awakened something in Fate, because here comes his rumbling tummy, ready to feast on some kobolds. Just the thought gets his hunger excited. While hiking later, Fate bumps into a strange-looking girl who carries an axe that's 3 times her size. Personally, some weapons should get a size restriction, because why is she looking like the Grim Reaper? One thing Fate notices is that both of them have the same eyes. However, he finds it shocking that he can't use his skill to identify the mysterious girl. All she tells him is that they'll meet again, but for now, he can have the kobold kills. It's not too long till the kobolds attack the farms, ruining the harvest and spreading devastating effects all over. Roxy, Fate, and some others scout kobold territory, but what awaits them is something they have never seen before. The King Kobold, level 50, the biggest and baddest of them that was born from accumulated hate. Talking about the bad news, the no ordinary monster triggers Fate's salivary glands, ready to suck that baby in. Despite its size and ferocity, Roxy is out here promising to take the beast down. One thing Fate can't stand is Roxy getting into danger. Therefore, he picks up the superhero cape again and goes for King Kobold and his minions. All Fate takes to battle with him is the nosy weapon-shifting sword, greed that keeps him company with some battle spectatorship while his soul-sucking ability is put to work. However, after a series of fighting, Fate can see why King Kobold was given the name known as the Crowned One. Not only was it big, it was also a monster of intelligence. Fate has to incur some deceitful acting skills where he acts dead to be able to even land a slash on King Kobold. Lastly, Greed launches an ultimate slash at King Kobold, killing it. What Fate didn't prepare for is the reaction after his human body absorbs a soul as large as King Kobold. Fate experiences a rippling effect worse than the feeling of hunger. If you can imagine what it feels like to exceed their satisfaction level, Fate was having a triple portion of it. Our boy must have taken a huge poop there. When reports of the events reach Roxy, it turns out the stranger cleaned up the battlefield good. Too good that the once beautiful scenery turns into something unrecognizable. In actual sense, the scenery was unrecognizable right from when the kobolds appeared. According to Roxy's suspicion, the only logical person who could do that is the axe-carrying Gallian girl she spotted some days ago. However, a huge burden has been shifted from her shoulders and she can return safely to the capital. Before the duo return home, Aisha makes a special request to Fate. She asks him to always stand and support Roxy in her stead, since she was unable to fulfill it as Roxy's mother. Actually, this has always been Fate's intention, and is the reason he dived into battle for Roxy's sake. That, and the fact that Gluttony had to be fed. Arriving at the capital, Fate struggles with his double life that's eating him up slowly at this point. The fact that he has to lie to Roxy is one thing. His hunger for souls is never satisfied. Not only that, he stumbles upon a plot by the Vlerick siblings. They plan to get rid of Roxy, the one they describe as a hindrance to their plans. Sending Roxy to Gallia means there's a high chance she will not make it back alive. After all, the Gallian Empire are known to be ruthless, and they possess skills that put the Holy Knight at a disadvantage. That aside, Hado leads a group of assassins. Well, not actually assassins. They're more like clowns. Hado leads them on a mission to deal with the Lich, once and for all. It seems the hideous siblings were finally putting an end to every hindrance in their way. The first round of the fight easily declares the Lich as the winner. Our boy didn't come to play. He was mad, super mad, when he entered the battlefield. Hado might have not realized it, but the rest of his accomplices quickly abandoned him to flee for their dear lives. To show you fate means business. He takes off his mask before Hado, who's already ranting like a dog but shaking like a wet rat in his night boots. The guys go head to head against each other, and the first thing Fate goes for is to break Hado's fake piece of holy sword into 2 parts. Moral of the story: you don't mess with Batman. Fate uses Hado's face as a bowling ball to hit several trees. He makes a complete joke of the so-called Holy Knight that Hado even results in pleading for his life. The pinpoint of Fate's pain is not about how the Vlericks treated him back then. It's about the ordeal the Vlericks were about to put Roxy through. The great Hado is rendered limbless, with no legs or arms, but he still dares to plead for his life. Come to think of it, Fate actually went ruthless because, wow, he revengefully drives his sword through Hado's heart, killing him on the spot. This automatically makes him absorb the powers of a holy knight, literally becoming the dark knight that rises. Greed also gets a power-up. It becomes a blade that can cut through anything. Yet, the only thing Fate wishes for is to cut Roxy's trip to Gallia. Fate painfully has to watch Roxy say goodbye to her servants before leaving for what seems like her death. She also drops a recommendation letter for Fate, so he gets a job somewhere. Yet what Fate is not going to do is sit and watch his girl die on the battlefield somewhere. If he can't stop Roxy, the least he can do is to support her. Fate packs his bags, drops his resignation letter, and his destination is Gallia. Roxy takes over her father's mantle by leading the troop heading for Gallia. She also groups up with several accomplices like Mugan and Miria. Meanwhile, Rain and her partner have been undergoing exclusive research on the Lich's kills. On a path to discover who the insanely powered terrorist is, the girls hit a eureka, a fancy word for discovery. From their theory, the weapon the Lich wields is no ordinary one. but one known as the Mortal Sin. We're back to Fate's travel and how he plans to get to Galia. He stops by a nearby town where he meets Set, the son of the village chief who exiled him. After Fate lost his father in an unfortunate death, the village chief and his wicked people didn't want an extra mouth to feed. So they labeled Fate as good for nothing and mocked him out of their sight. Well, I guess the tables have turned. It's not just a table turn, the table flipped. Set seeks Fate's power to handle a monster problem in that same village. Talk about PTSD mixed with lots of resentment. Yet for the honor of his father's memories, Fate takes on the job. Soon, it is revealed that bringing Fate back was a very bad idea. Even when Set vouches that the once good-for-nothing kid is now a superhero, his brain-dead father remains arrogant. It's not like any warrior wanted the money he offered to handle the monster. Fate was simply doing him a favor. This was charity work. Later on, Set takes Fate indoors to speak privately, not without apologizing. Fate not only gets information about the monsters that have been a threat to the village, but he also gets to bond with Set's daughter, who reminds him of his time with his father. While the trio enjoys the evening together, something happens. Fate immediately feels dizzy and collapses on the table. Set and his daughter are caught in a web of confusion when his daughter confesses that she gave Fate a sweet sent by grandfather. It is revealed to be a plot from the village chief, which is Set's father. All the little girl did was unknowingly help him deliver it. Just when you think things can't get bad, they get worse. Soon comes the arrival of the monsters Set talked about. They are revealed to be gargoyles, and this breed possesses fire-breathing powers that'll destroy anything in its path. Now imagine the massive disadvantage the village is under, now that Fate is out cold with no hope of consciousness anytime. Thanks to Set's knowledge of medicinals, he quickly creates an antidote and feeds it to Fate. Luckily, this has Fate up to his feet in no time. When Fate finally takes the invitation to the battlefield, he finds it messy, bloody, and disastrous. For some reason, the gargoyles are ruthless in their acts. But we've seen a more ruthless form of Fate. Fate identifies his opponents, wields the weapon-shifting greed, and flies into action. I said fly because he has to fight flying gargoyles. Get it? You got that right? Of course you did. During the fight, Fate tests out Greed's new ability to cut through fire magic, and the result leaves his surroundings remarkably burning. He takes care of the minions and absorbs their powers as he fights them. Afterward, he goes for the leader of the group. The boss-level gargoyle is revealed to be a stunning level 47 with fire resistance magic. To defeat the boss, Fate swings in the air and delivers a sweet slash, killing it for good. This time around, his body doesn't show side effects from absorbing that much power. When the morning sun arrived, the village had burnt down to nothing. Set's father, the almighty village chief, kicked the bucket during the fight, as well as many other villagers. Set is now meant to survive with his daughter and the very few people left. Both guys get to reconcile in a manly yet painful way. Fate also gets to visit his father's grave once again. After leaving his childhood village, Fate takes on a job as an escort to a big man. A big man who is revealed to be a wet puss in boots when they are confronted by bandits. Just then, a familiar face arrives to deal with the bandits. The little Galian girl with her big axe. Surprisingly, she doesn't attack. She claims that Fate owes her a favor for the kobolds, and she's here to take it. The big man has no objections and offers her a ride in his carriage. When Fate gets a little chit-chat with her, she introduces herself as Mine of Wrath. In other words, she possesses a skill that's one of the deadly sins and also an abomination to the divine law, similar to Fate's situation. Major shocker, she's also aware of greed. When they arrive in town, the man offers his payment, which Mine grabs for herself. What he doesn't expect is to also become Mine's babysitter. During their first day together, Fate finds out that Mine and Greed are old acquaintances. Not only that, Mine's weapon, Sloth, is also a weapon of mortal sin like greed. Boy, the story and plot twists just keep getting better. Greed informs Fate about all he needs to know about the mortal sins: gluttony, warmth, greed, sloth, lust, envy, and pride. These skills were born by defying the divine rules, and the most sinful of all is gluttony. In other words, Fate can consider himself as good as cursed. Greed also warns him that if he's not careful, gluttony might end up consuming him to a point where he has no control. The trick to resist this is to stay at a close point of starvation and not give in to gluttony's need for souls. But then again, that same night, Fate goes ahead to fight two high-ranked monsters that would do almost nothing to his insatiable hunger.
How was the video? We hope it was good. If so, please check these videos. Also, please comment down your thoughts and your suggestions for future videos. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing now to show the support to our channel. We hope to see you soon with another video right in this channel. Have a nice day.